We continue now the Daf 80a Daf in Mesechet Sanhedrin. This is Sanhedrin Daf 80a. On the previous summit, the Mishnah had a machlokas tanoim. Let's say you have a rotzeach that gets mixed up with others. That's what the Mishnah said. So in such a situation, you don't know who's supposed to get the death penalty. So it was a machlokas tanoim. The Tanakama said everybody is potter, and Rabbi Yehuda said you have to put them all in a vaulted chamber where they eventually will die. And the Gemara in the previous summit asked, who exactly is this rotzeach mixed up with? And the Gemara had two approaches. One approach was that we're talking about everybody that got mixed up as murderers, but there was one that had a verdict and the other ones had no verdict, and that's the machlokas tanoim. And then another answer was we're not even talking about people, we're talking about shvarim, we're talking about oxen that get mixed up, and one again had a verdict that it was going to be stoned and the others had no verdict, and they got mixed up in that fashion. But the Gemara now continues with a statement from Rava. Rava says, if so, hainu dekatani Allah, how do you explain what is then taught on the Mishnah, which says, Amar Rabbi Yossi says, Afilu Abba Chalafta, even my father Chalafta, Beinei, even if he's among them, this is true. That line does not fit according to the previous two explanations. Rashi explains, Yihachi Hadatani Allah, Bein l'Reish Lakish, Bein l'Shmuel Kamosiv. This is a question whether you're following Reish Lakish or whether you're following Shmuel's explanation. It doesn't matter if you're explaining that we're talking about a bunch of rotzchim. It doesn't matter if you're explaining that we're talking about a bunch of oxen. Yihachi Dahani Acher Demasnisin. If you're going to say that the others in the Mishnah, which the Rotzeach got mixed up with, the Rotzchim Ka'amar, that we're talking about other murderers, V'hai Rotzeach Shenesarev Behukar Ulavasof Nesarev Kamar, and the murder that we're talking about is a situation where originally we did recognize who the murderer was, and then he got mixed up with a bunch of these other people. So Hadatani Allah Bebraisa, so that which the Braisa teaches on the Mishnah, Hachi, it says as follows, Rotzeach Shenesarev Ba'cherim Kulan Peturin. Again, the Tanakama said the murderer gets mixed up with others, so they're all patur. Rabbi Yossi says, Afilu Abba Chalafta Beinei, and even if it's somebody who's so righteous like Abba Chalafta, Kulan Peturin, they're still all patur. My Afilu, to come Rabbi Yossi, what's the Afilu? What's the even that Rabbi Yossi is saying? That doesn't make any sense. And if you're going to say we're talking about oxen, then it really doesn't make any sense to talk about Abba Chalafta getting mixed up among them. So that Brisa doesn't make sense either way. And so the Gemara now offers another interpretation of the Mishnah. Elama Rava, rather Rava says, Hachi Kamar, this is what the Mishnah means to say. Shnayim shayu omdin. If there are two people standing, v'yotza chetz mi beineim, and an arrow shoots out from them, v'harag, and it kills, so shneihem peturin, so then they're both patur. V'yomer Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi says on that, this is what the Brisa adds, afilu Abba Chalafta beineim, even if my father Chalafta, even if Abba Chalafta was among them, that is true. V'shor shenigmar dino, and now also, let's say you have an ox, and there was a verdict that the ox is to be stoned. Shenisare b'shvorin acherim ma'alya soklin osan. If it gets mixed up with other oxen, and we're talking about oxen that are not supposed to be stoned, so then we stone them all. Rabbi Yehuda says, konsen osan lakipa, that again you bring them all into a vaulted chamber, and where they will die eventually. And Rashi explains, Elo Amar Rava, rather Rava says the explanation of the Mishnah is as follows, B'shalo hukar lebezin kamar. What we're actually talking about is where we never knew who the murderer was. We're not talking about a situation where we knew who the murderer was and then he got mixed up. It's talking about where we never knew. Kagon shnayim omdin, for example, two people standing, v'yotza chetz mi beineim, and again, an arrow comes out from the two of them, vein yodin eizem mehen zark, we don't know who threw it, shneihem peturin, so they're both patur. And Amar Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi said on that, afilu Abba Chalafta beineim, even if Abba Chalafta was among them. Shakol Yodin Shehu Chassid. Everybody knows that he's righteous. But Lo Zarku, he certainly did not throw it. But still, Lo Mechayvinan Leidach Misham Hai Chazaka. Just because of that presumption that he is a Chassid, that's not a reason to say that the others are going to be liable. Uvaha Afilu Rabbi Yehuda Mod, and even Rabbi Yehuda would admit to this halacha with regards again to the case of the arrow. Rabbi Yehuda da Amar Konsen Osan Lakipa. When Rabbi Yehuda said that we bring them all into a vaulted chamber, Lo Alakai, it's actually not going on that case. That's this other case with the oxen. Elahachi kamar, here's how it should be. Elahachi kamar Tanakama v'chisure mechser masnisan v'achi katani. Rather, the Tanakama says as follows. There are words missing in the Mishnah, and it should be as follows. V'shor shenigmar dino. If you have a shore again where there was a verdict and it gets mixed up with other ordinary oxen, soklin oso, so then you're going to stone it to al karchach kulu asira b'hana, because it has to be that they're all forbidden for benefit anyhow. Vein hefsid l'baylam b'skila. There's not going to be a loss if you're going to stone them all. Hilkach soklin osam. Therefore, you stone them. That way you'll fulfill the mitzvah of stoning with the one that you are obligated to stone. And then you have the other opinion in the Mishnah. Again, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, you bring them all into the vaulted chamber, meaning the point is there's no need to stone them. We don't want to bother the court to have to go through that. You just put them all into a room, and then they will die of starvation. And the Gemara continues, Vatanya, and we have a brisa that teaches like this as well. Para shehimisa, let's say you have a cow that kills, v'achar kach yolda, and then it gives birth. Imad shelo nigmar dina yolda, if it gave birth before the verdict, so then valda mutter, so then the offspring is still permitted. But ima misha nigmar dina yolada, but if the birth happened after the verdict, so then valda asura, so then the offspring is going to be forbidden. Nesarev ba'acherim, now let's say it gets mixed up with others, v'acherim ba'acherim, and the others get mixed up with others, so now we have no idea which cow it is that needs to be stoned. So the first opinion in this brisa is you bring them all into the vaulted chamber to die. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Mevi'in osan lebezdin v'soklan osan. You bring them to court and you stone them, and so you see a machlokas tanoim in this case. And the Gemara continues, Amar Mar, the master said, going on the first part of the brisa that talks about when you have the offspring, it said, Im anshelo nigmar dino yilada valda mutaris. It says that if before the verdict it gave birth, so then the offspring is mutter. And so the Gemara says, is that really true? Now, even though at the time that it gored, it was pregnant, and then you're still going to say that valda muteres? V'yamar Rava, but didn't Rava say, Vlad hanogachas aser, he uvalda nogcho, that when you have the offspring of an animal that gores, it is aser, and also the offspring is aser, because it's considered like they both gored together. And similarly, Vlad hanir bas aser, let's say you have an offspring of an animal that was the object of bestiality, that is going to be forbidden. He uvalda nir, because we're going to say that not only the animal, but also the offspring were involved, they were the objects of that bestiality, and so therefore, it should really depend on whether it was pregnant at the time of the goring, in terms of whether the offspring is aser or not. And so the Gemara instead says, Ema rather say as follows, Imad shelo nigmar dina, if before the verdict, Ibra v'yolada, before the verdict it became pregnant and then gave birth, so then valda mutter, so then we're going to say that the offspring is mutter. But misha nigmar dina, but if after the verdict, Ibra v'yolada, the animal became pregnant and gave birth, so then we're going to say valda aser, so then we're going to say that that offspring is aser. And the Gemara says to that, now that would be good according to the one who says if you have two things causing something together, in this case when you're talking about the child, so the mother of the child, that's one part that should be causing it to be prohibited, but the father of the child, that there we would actually say that the father animal of the child is mutter, and so it's zev zegorim, you have one that's saying aser, one that's saying mutter. This all works if you say zev zegorim aser. And Rashi explains, Valda Aser, again we say that the offspring is going to be prohibited, the Uber Yerech Imahu, that's the halach of Uber Yerech Imahu, the fetus is considered like an extension of its mother, V'gamhu Nesar B'gmar Denimo, and so therefore when there's a verdict on the mother, there's going to be a verdict on the offspring as well. But the Gemara then asked, V'amar Rava, didn't Rava say, Vlad HaNogachas Aser, that if you have the Vlad of the Nogachas, again the animal gored, so it becomes forbidden, the forbidden over here is B'hakrava, that's to bring it on the Mizbeach, to bring it as a carbon in the Beis HaMikdash, that's not allowed. Now the case over here is, let's say the goring was just with one witness, so you're not actually stoning the animal. Or let's say it's the owners that said it happened. In such a case, it becomes forbidden to the Almighty. It becomes forbidden as a carbon, but it actually is not forbidden for a regular person to benefit. But the point is, therefore, what do we understand from Rava? We understand from Rava that let's say there were edim and it was going to be stoned. Then we would say it should be stoned, and it's forbidden even to a regular person. V'tzarech ligmor din shneim, and you're going to have the verdict apply to both of them. You can't say that the reason of the Tanakama that the offspring is mutter mishum de lo nigmar dino ima is because the verdict wasn't together with it. Because if they didn't come to Bezdin, so you don't need to talk about the offspring. Afilo imo nami, that applies to the mother also. You have to bring the animal to Bezdin. Im lo nigmar dino lo mitzra, without a verdict, it's not usher. misni mutter, would the Tana then need to say mutter? Hachi ashminan de'ein zokuk lahavia lebezin ka'amar u'tiyufta derava. So rather, what it's teaching us is that you don't need to bring it to bezin, and that would be a refutation of Rava, because again, Rava said that the vlad hanogachas is asur. And so then the Gemara said, Ema, rather say as follows: Imad shelo nigmar dina ibra v'yolada. If before the verdict it was pregnant and it gave birth, meaning dehainu bein negicha ligmar din. We're talking here between the goring and the verdict. To lo have vlad lo b'shas negicha, so there was no offspring. It wasn't pregnant at the time of the negicha, at the time of the goring. V'lo b'shas gemar din, and also the birth already happened before the gemar din, so it wasn't pregnant at the time of the gemar din. V'lo notzar min isser, it wasn't created from isser. Da'kati imei shari haves shari, because the mother was still permitted before the verdict. So then valda mutter. So then we're going to say that the offspring is mutter. That's what it should say. Again, if before the verdict, after the goring, but before the verdict, the animal became pregnant and gave birth, then we say valda mutter. But if from the time of the verdict it became pregnant and gave birth, the nolad minho isser, the point over here is you have a verdict and then it was born from that isser, so then asser, then the offspring is asser. Alpha gavdalo have a b'shas negich, even though it wasn't pregnant at the time of the goring, v'lo b'shas gemar din, and it wasn't pregnant at the time of the verdict, but there was a verdict, and now this is an animal that's asser and then has an offspring. The offspring is asur. But the Gemara then said, but that only makes sense if you say zev is gorim asur, because this offspring, it's a child of the mother. The mother was something asur, but it's also the child of its father, of the father animal, and that's mutter. So it has to be only according to the one who says zev is gorim asur. Hanichol amandamar plugsahu b'tmura, and this is actually a machlokas in Meseches Tmura, whether we say zev is gorim asur, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Pei Amid Beis.